Thank you all for being here. Welcome to Colorado Mesa University. I'm Derek Wagner, the university's VP for External Relations, and I get the pleasure of welcoming you all to campus tonight. I know beautiful spring evening. There's no shortage of things to be doing outside, having fun in Grand Junction. So thank you all for making time to make this a priority to be here tonight to listen to this crucial conversation that really is timely, and it's really a topic that Grand Junction really is an epicenter of. So I'd like to thank our partners from the Steamboat Institute. The CMU Civic Forum is an effort that we launched a number of years ago, and it's really just a umbrella for us to bring conversations to campus to sort of expose our students to differing viewpoints on a number of different topics. And over the past number of years, we've had a lot of success doing that. And one of our crucial and critical partners in this effort has been the Steamboat Institute, that has really doubled down and helped us bring their debate series to this campus, in addition to all the rest of the campuses that they're visiting across the country. So we really appreciate that. It's a great partnership. And I hope you all really enjoy the program tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend Jennifer Schubert-Aiken. Jennifer is the chairman and CEO of the Steamboat Institute, an organization she co-founded in 2008. The Steamboat Institute promotes America's first principles and encourages civilized discourse by hosting debates on college campuses across America. Jennifer is a member of the advisory boards for the Benson Center for the Study of Western Civilization at CU Boulder and the Ed Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets at the University of Maryland. She also serves on the board of directors of Rebecca's Angels, a nonprofit organization helping children with post-traumatic stress disorder, founded by Boston Marathon bombing survivor Rebecca Gregory. Please join me in hearty welcome for Jennifer Schubert-Aiken.
Well, thanks, Derek, for that warm welcome. I love coming out to Grand Junction, especially in April. For those of you who are watching the live stream, oops, get organized here. I'm sorry you aren't here because it's a bluebird day in Mesa County, and all the public land that surrounds this beautiful place is just spectacular right now with the red rocks and all the hiking and mountain biking out there. So it's always a pleasure to come out to Mesa County. It's also always truly a pleasure to partner with the CMU Civic Forum. I know those of you here in Grand Junction, I hope you appreciate what a great asset this is to Colorado Mesa University. Derek and President Marshall are always great to work with. We welcome all of you with us here in Grand Junction tonight, as well as many more who are watching the live stream. Let me tell you briefly about Steamboat Institute. Steamboat Institute, we were founded in Steamboat Springs, Colorado in 2008 for the purpose of educating people about America's constitutional principles and fostering an appreciation of the freedom we enjoy as Americans. With inspiration provided by former University of Colorado President Bruce Benson, Steamboat Institute has hosted dozens of debates on college campuses across America over the past 7 years with our Campus Liberty Tour. Why debates? Well, it's because, as John Stuart Mill, the influential 19th century English philosopher, famously stated, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that." Our goal with every debate is to teach students and all to attend how to think, not what to think. You are always welcome at a Steamboat Institute debate, regardless of your political ideology. We only ask that you show respect and civility for our speakers and to our other guests. Tonight's debate is the last in a series of 5 debates we are hosting on campuses all over the country this spring semester, with a unique debate topic at each location. We kicked off the Spring Campus Liberty Tour at Princeton University in February with a debate on whether the U.S.-Israel alliance is a strategic asset for American foreign policy. Our second debate was at the University of Colorado in Boulder on the topic of whether transgender athletes should be allowed to compete in women's sports. Our third debate was at Arizona State University on the topic of whether we should be concerned about reducing our national debt. And last week, we visited the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, where the topic was birthright citizenship. All of our debates are live streamed on Steamboat Institute's YouTube channel. They can be viewed in their entirety. So all of those debates I just listed, you can find any of them on our YouTube channel and watch the whole thing if you would like to. You can also go to steamboatinstitute.org and see all of our past debates and upcoming programs. Now, we have a special opportunity for students and young professionals ages 20 to 29, so listen up if you're in that group. On August 22nd and 23rd, we will host our 17th annual Freedom Conference at the Beaver Creek Resort near Vail. Hundreds of people of all ages come to Beaver Creek from all over America every year in August to meet and mingle with our nation's leaders in government, education, the military, media, journalism, you name it. For our young leaders, these scholarships cover travel, lodging, meals, and registration. So it's a really great opportunity. And best of all, you get to network with these amazing speakers who come to this event. Scholarship applications are available at steamboatinstitute.org. They are due June 13th, so check it out if you're interested. General registration for everybody else. If you're over the age of 29, go to steamboatinstitute.org. We'll be announcing some really exciting speakers in the next few days and weeks. To give you an idea, some of our past speakers have included former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Fox News host Dana Perino, country music superstar John Rich, Colorado Governor Jared Polis, and dozens of others. So we have something for everyone. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, Steamboat Institute relies on the support of many generous individuals and foundations to bring programs such as tonight's debate to college campuses all over the country. I would like to extend a special thank you to the Adolph Coors Foundation for their generous support, which has allowed us to greatly expand the Campus Liberty Tour. I would also like to thank Bruce and Marcy Benson, the Diana Davis Spencer Foundation, the Jack Roth Charitable Foundation, the Lined and Harry Bradley Foundation, the Arthur N. Roop Foundation, the Anschutz Foundation, the Tina Snyder Foundation, and the Woodford Foundation for Limited Government. Now, for tonight's debate. Should the federal government decentralize its operations by moving some federal agencies out of Washington? Will this move the decision makers closer to the people they serve, or will it increase inefficiencies? This idea is back in the news after Congressman Jeff Hurd introduced a bill to bring the Bureau of Land Management headquarters back to Grand Junction. Tonight's program will examine this issue with a fair and balanced debate on the following resolution. Be it resolved, more federal agencies, such as the Bureau of Land Management, should be relocated outside Washington, D.C. We invite all of you, those here in the room and those watching the live stream, to respond with your view on this resolution. So please take out your phone and vote if you haven't already. The choices are agree, disagree, or undecided. So we want to do this now before the debate begins so we can see what the audience opinions are. Then, after the debate ends, we are going to ask your opinions again to see how opinions have shifted. So please vote, because the more people who vote, the more representative it is of our audience. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers and moderator for this evening. So I would like to ask them all to come up on the stage and take their seats. And then I will introduce each one of them, and then we'll get the discussion started. So come on up. Okay, arguing the affirmative on tonight's resolution is William Perry Pendley, attorney and former deputy director of the Bureau of Land Management. Perry led the Mountain States Legal Foundation, a nonprofit public interest law firm, for nearly 30 years. During the first Trump administration, Perry was deputy director of policy and programs for the BLM, which is part of the U.S. Department of the Interior. In this role, he was responsible for its 10,000 employees who managed 245 million acres of federal land, mostly in the West and Alaska. Perry is the author of Sagebrush Rebel, Reagan's Battle with Environmental Extremists and Why It Matters Today. During the Reagan administration, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy and Minerals in the U.S. Department of the Interior. Perry was born and raised in Cheyenne, Wyoming, earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in economics and political science from George Washington University, was a captain in the U.S. Marine Corps, and received his JD from the University of Wyoming College of Law. Please give a warm welcome to Perry Pendley. Arguing the negative on tonight's resolution is Mary Jo Rugwell, president of the Public Lands Foundation, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization comprised primarily of hundreds of retired employees of the Bureau of Land Management. The mission of PLF is to advocate for BLM administered public lands to remain in public hands and be professionally managed by experienced and dedicated federal employees. Mary Jo retired from the BLM in 2019 as the state director for Wyoming. In all, she served the American people for over 46 years, with 35 of those years in various capacities with the BLM in Washington, D.C., Nevada, New Mexico, and Wyoming. Mary Jo earned her bachelor's degree from Chapman University and her Master of Public Administration from the University of Wyoming. She resides in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Please give a warm welcome to Mary Jo Rugwell. Our moderator for tonight's debate is Amber Duke, senior editor at the Daily Caller and co-host of The Hill's Rising, a daily online news program. She is the author of The Snowflakes Revolt: How Woke Millennials Hijacked American Media. Amber was named the 2019-20 Tony Blankley Fellow by the Steamboat Institute. She previously served as the Washington editor of The Spectator, was the White House correspondent for the Daily Caller, and covered bias and abuse in the university system for campus reform. She graduated from Georgetown University in 2016 with a BA in government and economics, and I'm now going to turn it over to our moderator, Amber Duke.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. Well, a huge thank you to Jennifer and to the Steamboat Institute and Colorado Mesa University for putting this event on. And thank you to the audience, all of you, for turning up. Obviously, this is a very timely debate, and so I imagine we'll be covering a lot of ground tonight. As you can see, the pre-debate poll is up now. So far, we have 50% of the audience agreeing with the resolution, 32% opposed, and a healthy 18% undecided, which is good because then you have the opportunity to hear from our expert debaters here who are both obviously very well qualified based on their biographies, and then hopefully feel a little more informed, if not reaching a conclusion by the end of the debate. Just a quick note about how this debate will run. There will be a portion where it will be moderated by myself. Then we will actually move into audience questions, which can be submitted via the QR codes at your tables or on your seats, which I will receive here on my handy iPad. And I will filter through those questions, get out any repeats and any opinions, and we'll ask those to the debaters in the second half of the debate. And then, of course, at the end, we will repoll the audience to see if people's minds have been changed. But we are going to start with opening statements. So, Mr. William Perry Pendley, I believe you were up first with 5 minutes.
The federal government owns 1/3 of the country. 245 million acres of that, another third, is operated by the Bureau of Land Management. Most of that federal land is in the West, the 11 Western states and Alaska, although some states have much more. Idaho, Utah, Nevada, Alaska, they have 60 to 70% federal land. But even Wyoming, for example, that only has, say, 47% federal land, 74% of Sweetwater County, the state's largest and larger than 6 states, has 74% federal land. Colorado may have 36% federal land, but Mesa County here in Grand Junction, the federal government controls 73% of that land. And it's not just rural counties. The United States owned 88% of Clark County, which is home to Las Vegas. So when the federal government sneezes, we catch a cold. It was 99% of BLM employees live in the West, live in those 11 Western states and Alaska. 97% of the employees live there, 99% of the land is there. However, the top decision makers, the people who at the end of the day decide what happens out here, they all work in Washington, D.C. They are 2 and even 4 time zones away from the lands that they manage. So say, for example, Alaska, where 60-some% of the land is owned by the federal government, the people who are affected by BLM's decisions, and that's almost all of Alaska, or the BLM decision makers in Alaska, when they come back from lunch, the people in Washington have already left for the day. So President Trump's view was that the people who manage lands in the great American West ought to live in the great American West. And it was his view to bring those decision makers regarding coal, for example, to Montana and Wyoming. The decision makers regarding wild horses, most of which are in Nevada, take them to Nevada. The experts on archaeological resources, primarily in the Four Corners states, bring them into Albuquerque and Santa Fe and move the headquarters here to Grand Junction. Before we moved out here, we in Washington, D.C., and when I say we, I mean the secretary, the deputy secretary, the assistant secretaries, the bureau heads, we made decisions every day on a piece of paper, a photograph, and a map. No on-the-ground experience. And that all changed for me when I came out here and opened the headquarters in 2020. When we had those horrific fires, the Pine Gulch fire north of town, started by lightning, the fire east of town on I-70, Glenwood Canyon, started by an automobile. And I saw the fire clouds in the sky. I smelled the smoke. I brushed the ash off my car on my way to work. And I saw the signs on the churches that read, "Pray for our firefighters." I went over to the fairgrounds when the firefighters got their briefings. I went out online with them and we watched the fires roll down the hill toward us. It was nothing for me to hop in a government rig and run up to Cody or up to Boise, where, by the way, our national wildfire headquarters has been since 1965. Go over to Utah or down in New Mexico to catch a flight into California or Las Vegas or Arizona, where I joined the BLM law enforcement people fighting illegal immigration. I visited places that I hadn't seen a director in years, if ever. And as a result of that, I benefited greatly from their experience and their knowledge and their expertise. We had better decision making. We had closer communication with the experts in the field. And I do believe the field experts are in the field. And I was able to publish scores of articles and editorials regarding the great work BLM employees in the field are doing. The move was such a success that President Trump made it a part of his campaign in 2020, part of his campaign in 2024, and he just recently announced an executive order saying, let's move 100,000 people out west. U.S. Department of Agriculture says we're going to do that. We're going to close our headquarters. We're going to move out of the Washington, D.C. area. And the largest outfit in the U.S. Department of Agriculture happens to be the U.S. Forest Service, 35,000 employees. They manage 193 million acres of forest. 80% of that is in the American West. I say it was a great success before, will be a great success again. I vote in the affirmative. Let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. And now an equal 5 minutes to Miss Mary Jo Rugwell.
Sorry, Mr. Pendley, I have to pull this down here. We checked earlier to see if you could actually see me over the podium. Unfortunately, you kind of can, but good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Jo Rugwell, and I currently serve as the president of the Public Lands Foundation. The PLF is a nonpartisan, nonprofit volunteer organization comprised primarily of hundreds of retired employees of the Bureau of Land Management. Our mission is advocating for public lands to remain in public hands and to support the professionals who manage them. I'm presenting the negative position on moving, oh, sorry. See, I didn't do it right. I'm presenting the negative position on moving federal agencies outside of the Washington, D.C. area. With over 36 years of experience with BLM, my remarks will focus on that organization. However, much of what I will say would apply to other organizations of comparable size and complexity. BLM is part of the Department of the Interior. It manages 245 million acres of surface and more than 600 million acres of mineral estate for the benefit of all Americans. The total economic output from BLM administered lands exceeds $250 billion, and it brings in direct receipts that are 5 times more than what the BLM spends every year. And it does so with a nationwide staff of about 8,000 people. Under the first Trump administration, the department decided to move the BLM's headquarters in Washington, D.C. to Grand Junction, Colorado. When this happened, most of the headquarters employees either chose to retire or obtain employment with other organizations because of the difficulty of uprooting their families. In addition, the directorates that provided policy oversight were moved to 11 different offices in the West instead of putting all functional areas together in Grand Junction. This made interdisciplinary coordination difficult, created a weak and ineffective command structure, left a void of expertise at the headquarters level, and presented challenges to the employees that remained. When the administration changed in 2020, the decision was made to move the headquarters back to Washington, D.C. However, the office in Grand Junction would remain a Western headquarters. Since taking office in January, the Trump administration has stated that they will again move federal agencies like the BLM out of Washington, D.C. I will discuss the rationale and explain why I believe it's flawed. The first goal of moving BLM headquarters to the West is to ensure that public lands decisions are made where the lands are located. BLM is already a decentralized organization with 97% of its employees living and working in the West where the BLM administered public lands are. These state, district, and field offices have delegated authority to make land management decisions consistent with the direction that they're given by the administration. The work they do is operational, and they do it in close coordination with tribes, states, counties, local governments, and public lands users. The decisions delegated to the field level should remain at that level. One of the biggest challenges of the last 20-some years has been that rather than providing overall direction and allowing decision makers to do their jobs out here in the West and holding them accountable if they don't, the department has often made the decisions themselves. On-the-ground decisions that are made to satisfy political agendas, which are not based on resource conditions and public involvement, are not durable or sustainable. They will simply be reversed by the next administration. The next reason given to move the BLM's headquarters is that it would save money if the offices were in less expensive parts of the country. The reality is that since less than 3% of BLM's employees were in the headquarters office, they could easily be housed in existing buildings already owned by the federal government. Another rationale provided for moving the headquarters to the West is to make it easier for Western constituents and stakeholders to meet with BLM leadership. When stakeholders want to engage with federal government agencies, it is much simpler when they're all in the same place. Imagine having to travel to Grand Junction to meet with BLM leaders and then needing to stop at several other towns in the country to meet with other federal agency leaders. It just doesn't make any sense. Additionally, locating the headquarters in a particular state could lead to serving local interests instead of considering the overall needs of all public lands and their users. It's critical to have a cadre of top-level leadership and some knowledgeable resource staff to support them in Washington, D.C. The headquarters office provides policy oversight and budget formulation. They craft guidance that ensures that the current administration's priorities are met. They provide crucial information to the Secretary of the Interior, OMB, Congress, other federal agencies, NGOs, and constituent groups on a regular basis. These interactions are routine, spontaneous, and require in-person engagement to be most effective. Without a headquarters presence in Washington, D.C., BLM will lack timely input into daily discussions on policy, budget, legislation, and problem solving. It will create an environment where consistency is replaced by inefficiency and uncertainty. Ultimately, BLM will become irrelevant, which would be a disservice to all Americans.
Thank you both for your opening statements. And I think as this debate goes on, we'll start with some of the specific elements of the debate over BLM, since that's obviously where your expertise lies, and then maybe we'll broaden it out to a larger discussion about government bureaucracy more generally. The first question I want to start with was something that both of you all acknowledged in your opening remarks, which was the idea that leadership being closer to the people and the lands that they manage can be a potentially effective way for leadership to make better decisions. Um, I'll start with you, Mary Jo. Uh, do you think that's a valid point that Perry raised in his opening remarks? And can leadership still effectively take concerns from localities into consideration while being housed in Washington, D.C.?
I think that the reason for directors and high level leadership in DC to occasionally come out to the field is so that they can get a better sense of what's happening in the West. But as I mentioned, the reality is that if given good guidance and direct um, information about what the administration's priorities are, um, decision makers are already in the West and can make those decisions, and they've already got the knowledge about what's happening on the ground, and they should have already worked with local people, cooperating agencies, tribes, counties, conservation districts. If we don't do that in the field, the decisions aren't solid. People aren't going to support them. They won't last between administrations. If people have buy-in, they're going to tell the administration, hey, they did this the right way. We need to keep this. If decisions are made without that, there's just going to be this whiplash back and forth, which is not good.
And Perry, would you like to respond?
As I said in my opening, when I was in Washington, sitting with the top decision makers at the Department of the Interior and other departments, every day we made decisions based upon a piece of paper, a photograph, and a map. And when I say piece of paper, I mean we had voluminous documents, hundreds of pages of documents, and we were relying on what people out in the field had told us, truly the experts. But you simply can't understand a situation if you're not on the ground. If you, as I've argued several cases before the Supreme Court of the United States, and what every lawyer is told before you get in front of that court, you better have gone out to the field. You have better gone out to the situation and understand it fully. And that's what the decision makers in Washington lacked. And that's how I benefited when I came out to Grand Junction and I was able to visit these places throughout the Rocky Mountain West and understand firsthand. And maybe I thought that state director was right. Maybe I thought that field supervisor was right. And maybe I didn't. Maybe I said, what were you thinking about? But that improved the decision making, and I was able to argue to the secretary and to the deputy secretary what I thought would be the right position, and based on an on the ground understanding of what was going on and dealing with the local people. And then that's another thing that we don't talk about, and that's these decisions. When they go out of a district office, a field office, a state office, they go to Washington, and there's no understanding locally of why did that happen? Why did it happen like that? And when you're on the ground here, when you're in the West, and you have to explain to people you run into, hey, here's why we did this. It makes a big difference.
So I'll go back to you and then I'll allow Mary Jo to respond. Mary Jo has written in some op-eds about the importance of leadership, specifically in the BLM, being close to Congress for the purposes of budget reconciliation and advocating for the BLM's interests to elected officials. Do you think that is a valid reason to potentially keep leadership in the DC corridor?
No, I don't. Because whether you can go to Congress anytime if you're the director of the Bureau of Land Management. And the question is, where do you want your office to be? Do you want your office to be in Grand Junction where you're meeting with people, you're in the field, you're dealing with the experts in the field, you're going making the field trips, you're seeing this stuff up close and personal, and then you're going to Washington and sitting in front of a Senate committee and explaining it to them? I'd lot rather have that detailed on the ground information when I communicate to senators and members of Congress, as I have in the past, what's going on the ground. I said, Mr. Pendley, how do you know this? I can tell him I was there. I saw it myself. And that makes a big difference. Well, I read it in some documents that we have. I have a prepared statement that somebody prepared for me to deliver today. No, I was there. I saw it. I can tell you that.
A quick follow up, and then Mary Jo, you can respond. Do you think it could potentially lead to inefficiency if leadership is constantly having to travel back and forth to field offices in DC?
No, I don't think, and I mean, leadership's going to be, it shouldn't be always sitting here in Grand Junction is what I did, going up to Cody, Wyoming and meeting district and field offices along the way that hadn't seen a director in decades, going down with the BLM law enforcement on the border, understanding what we were dealing with and trying to protect BLM from illegal immigrants. And going down to New Mexico and working with the people on protecting archaeological resources. So you're always going to be on the road, and it's not an issue you ought to be operating out of the West, and then periodically go back to Washington. If you've been watching the number of days Congress has been in recess recently, it's not a big lift, as we say at the BLM, to go back when they're in session.
Mary Jo?
Well, I think that, Mr. Penley makes good points, but at the end of the day, Grand Junction is a beautiful place. I don't want anybody to think that what I'm saying has anything to do with Grand Junction not being fabulous, because it absolutely is. The reality is it's not that easy of a place to get to, right? And so that, I think, complicates things. While it's very important to know what's going on the ground, you can come from DC to the West to check that out. It's really critical, I think, that, to mention that very often BLM directors come from the West. And actually, the best BLM directors come from the West because they do already know the West. Um, and unfortunately, that doesn't always work out, but sometimes it does, and it's a good thing. But at the end of the day, there are very critical functions that have to be done in DC. Many people that have spent many years of a career with BLM have worked both in the Washington office and out in the field. In the Washington office, they find out how important it is to have people there that know what's happening on the ground. BLM generally sends people back and forth in their career from the field to DC and then back out again so that they have that experience, they have that knowledge. Because what happens in DC is a lot of times somebody in Congress needs a briefing. Somebody at OMB needs a briefing. The secretary needs to know something. These things happen very quickly. They're spontaneous. You have to be there and do it when the request is there. When you have people like that are 2 or 3 time zones away, it's going to be pretty tough to meet those needs. So I think, and I am not advocating for a massive headquarters location. You don't need to have hundreds of people in Washington, D.C., but you need to have the right people and the right number of people back there. There's a saying that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. BLM does not need to be on the menu. And I'm afraid that that's what's going to happen, not to mention the fact that it's not good to be moving things back and forth multiple times. I mean, it's not fair to the employees, it's not fair to the organization, and it's certainly not fair to the taxpayer.
You brought up the issue of time zones, and I noted that Perry mentioned that in his opening remarks as well, but from a different perspective, which was the idea of leadership not being able to coordinate as easily with people in the field because of that difference in the time zone. Did you want to address that point?
It is a challenge. I mean, many times if you work in the West, when there's a very time sensitive request, you come in at, you know, 6:30, 7 o'clock, they've already been at work for 2 hours. And so sometimes that puts pressure on the people in the West. But you're going to have that problem if the headquarters is out here and people in the East are wanting information and you're not there yet. Although, in this day and age, we're on our phones and on our email constantly. So it does, I guess that isn't as much of an issue as it used to be in the good old days. But at the end of the day, the time zones do present a challenge, particularly when you're talking about Alaska, because then you're looking at what, six time zones difference or something from DC. So
Perry, would you like to chime in on
Of
that?
course, well, that's the question, isn't it? 2 or 4 time zones away from the land you're managing and the people who are affected by your decisions, or 2 or 4 times away from some senators or congressmen who want a question answered. And we erred on the side of putting those people on the lands where they're managing the lands, in the time zone they're managing the lands, and where the people are affected by those decisions. And it's not just it isn't just the one director; it's the deputy director and assistant directors, the people who are making decisions in the field. Uh, in addition, we didn't move all of the functions of the BLM out here. We left a number of functions like public relations, congressional relations, the budgetary function, the FOIA functions, and others that are really exclusive to Washington, D.C. We left those folks in Washington, D.C., and thought that was a good decision because they can deal with Congress.
One of the fascinating things that I've noticed about this debate in particular is that it actually cuts across partisan lines. And specifically, when it comes to the BLM headquarters moving to Grand Junction, there were several Democrats who supported that move, including Governor Polis and Senators Michael Bennet and John Hickenlooper, at least in part because, according to the Grand Junction Economic Partnership, they saw 41 jobs move here with an annual average salary of $144,000, which supported 57 additional local jobs, leading to a $9 million annual impact.
I can tell you President Trump was grateful for their support.
On that point, though, Mary Jo, I'll start with you. Um, do you think there's a valid argument to be made that the movement of federal agencies out of DC could disperse the economic benefits of the massive amounts of employment that happen at the federal level?
That's an interesting question, Amber. And I think that the reality is that one of the things that the previous administration, the BLM under the previous administration, was going to do was to leave a directorate here in Grand Junction, and that directorate had full staff, I believe 40 people, and so that would remain here. It would be a significant economic benefit for Grand Junction. Um, I think the critical thing is that, again, not everything has to be in DC, but some things do. And doing enough study and analysis to make sure that you're moving the right stuff and leaving the right stuff there, I think is something that's critical. And I think that while the first Trump administration um, said that they had done a study. I don't know that it was very, I'm not sure that a lot of time was taken to put that together. And I think that it's really important that before we make organizational changes, we know exactly what it is we're doing, what the goal is. The goal should be to make the organization better. And in order to do that, you have to be thoughtful and deliberate. And as we know in today's world, that seems to be sometimes in short supply. So,
Perry, your response,
Yeah,
and
that
specifically
wasn't
on that.
Trump. That wasn't our goal at all. Our goal wasn't to make the organization better. The goal was to make the organization able to make better decisions, to better serve the American people, and to better serve Westerners. That was the whole point. Put decision makers out here so they know what in the world they're dealing with, and the people who they're dealing with, and the effect on those people of those decisions. Organizations come and organizations go, but the key thing is good on the ground decisions come from being on the ground. when you're exposed to the facts and you see what's happening and you see the impact on people. I'll tell you, uh, I could have been in Washington, D.C. during that Pine Gulch fire, and I would have known there was a fire north of Grand Junction, and I would have known it was a terrible fire, and we were having a terrible time getting it under control. But it's a whole different kettle of fish when you're out here and you're watching the clouds roll in over the skies and you're seeing the ash and you're seeing those signs on the churches. I'll tell you, and you're out on the lines with those firefighters. It's a different deal. And I wouldn't trade a stack of documents and a bunch of photographs and a bunch of YouTube videos on what that fire was like for having been on the ground and walked along with the firefighters.
Mary Jo?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm sure that the fire community really appreciated your presence there. But I think the point is you didn't have to make a decision about that, right? Because the incident commander is the one that makes the decision on the fire line. And
Oh, you
so,
bet.
you know,
I'm a Marine. I know
yeah,
chain
you
of
got
command.
that, right? Once a Marine, always a Marine, right?
To follow up, Perry, on some of the comments you just made, obviously we're in the last Trump administration, but the current administration has indicated that some of the motivation for moving government agencies out of DC is to have people who don't want to make the move leave the federal workforce, which would lead to a reduction potentially in overall staff. So, what do you say to people who argue, well, you just want to move the BLM out of DC so that you can cut the federal workforce?
Absolutely untrue. It's untrue back in 2019, 2020 when we did it. All those members of Congress from Washington and uh, DC and Virginia and Maryland, they had all these employees they were worried about. And that's what they said. The environmental group said the same thing, or you're just trying to get rid of people. And the answer was no, absolutely not. We wanted on the ground decision making. And as a result of that, I made sure that every employee who did not want to move west, and I got it, people come to work in Washington, D.C., and they've been there 5, 10, 15, 20 years. They've got families, they've got homes, they've got grandparents. They don't want to leave the D.C. area. We understood that. And so every single one of them, I told them, if you want to continue working for the federal government, I'll get you a job in the BLM, in the Department of Interior, or perhaps some other department of agency. Nobody quit. Nobody had to quit. They got jobs elsewhere. We had no adverse legal action against us, no union activity against us, no equal opportunity employment action, no merit system protection board action against us as a result of our efforts to make the move. And everyone was happy because they got jobs where they wanted to be, and we were able to put decision makers on the ground out west.
Mary Jo, I see you're itching to respond, so please.
My eyes are twinkling. Honestly, it was wonderful that you guys made sure that employees were able that could not move had good jobs with other organizations. I will say that the move was difficult for employees because they really didn't want to leave the BLM. They wanted to work for the BLM, but they couldn't move. And so they were very thankful that, Mr. Pendley and the leadership of the BLM helped them get other jobs, but it wasn't easy for them to leave the BLM. And Mr. Pendley may not remember, but for the first time ever, the American Federation of Government Employees got a union going at the Washington office headquarters, which had never happened before. So as a result of the move. So
And Perry, did you want to respond?
No.
Okay, great. We'll move on then. Uh, you've all talked about how the BLM is sort of uniquely decentralized when it comes to federal agencies. Do you think that part of the problem that people have identified with most of the government being seated in DC, particularly when a majority of Americans do agree with cutting government to save money, do you think replication of that decentralization could solve a lot of the issues that Americans have, a lot of the problems that people identify with the federal bureaucracy being so centralized? And whoever wants to take it first, feel free.
Well, I frankly think the American people are shocked by what Elon Musk is discovering with this Department of Government Efficiency. I tell you, I worked on Capitol Hill for a number of years. I've been in and around Washington for decades, and I'm horrified by what I'm seeing, the inefficiencies, the abuse. I mean, we got a couple hundred people who are 100 years old drawing Social Security. And, and so, thank you. And so I think the American people are fed up with it, and I think they want to see some efficiency. Uh, they're having a hard time dealing with their own finances, and they want this efficiency to be achieved. And one of the ways to achieve it is get the people out in the field. They don't have to be in Washington. They make better decisions when they're in the field. And I think the president's on the right track.
Mary Jo.
Uh, I think that no one that has ever worked for the federal government as long as I did would tell you that they didn't want to see a better government, a more efficient government, a government that didn't have waste. Uh, they would want to see employees that did a good job, that wanted to do a good job, that had good performance, that weren't conduct issues. Anybody that's worked for years for the federal government would say that they want to see that. Unfortunately, I think what's happening right now isn't that. We're not. I think in order to make government better and more efficient, you have to study the problem first before you make a bunch of decisions and cuts. Because unfortunately, if you move too quickly, you tend to cut things like the people that are in charge of taking care of the nuclear materials and the folks that were, working on Ebola and stuff like that. Those are not the kinds of people you want to cut. Yes, we want to cut people that aren't doing their job well. Yes, we want to get rid of people that are conduct problems, but we don't want to get rid of good employees that are doing amazing work. And there's still a bunch of federal employees out there that are, I can tell you.
We've obviously heard some consternation from the audience over the debate on Doge. As a reminder, you can submit questions via your QR code, and I will attempt to get all of those asked of the debaters in the second half. But let's keep the outbursts to a minimum just to keep it respectful. Is there a potential, Perry, you think, for brain drain as this project develops of moving federal agents out of the DC area? People who you identified who don't want to move or who move to different agencies, could that lead to agencies like the BLM losing some of its most valuable assets?
I don't believe so. And, people said that back in 2019 and 2020 when we were in that process. And I always went to the career people. I didn't go to the political people. I went to the career people with BLM. The senior people had been there 15 and 20 years. And I'd say, who are they talking about? Who are we losing? Who are these people that are so indispensable that we got to have? Because bear in mind, we had things we wanted to get done. One of them was energy independence, which we did achieve in 2019. And so and for an example of that is when somebody wants to drill on a well, drill on a lease, they have to, Mary knows this well, they have to get an application for permit to drill. They have to file an APD that has to be processed, goes through the loops, and gets back. And delays in that delay the time that people can spud in and get these discoveries made. And so we put a 90-day clock on our APDs. We said, we want you to say yay or nay on an APD in 90 days. So we wanted to retain the expertise for people to be able to respond to that. We're not going to put a clock on somebody and say, well, we're going to tie one hand behind your back. So we wanted to ensure they had great people. So whenever somebody would say that, I would go to the people working for me, the career people, and say, who are they talking about? Is this somebody we got to rehire, have a rehired annuitant come back, somebody to come back and work for us, so find a way to sweeten the pot so this person stays? And the answer all the time was, nope, we don't know anybody that fits that bill.
Mary Jo, are you concerned about brain drain?
I am. I think that in 2019 we lost. Now, I will not say that everyone that left was crucial people. There were some people that left that probably should have gone, and so that was a good thing. But there were also people there that had expertise that we lost when they couldn't move. The other thing that I did want to mention is that when the Biden administration came in, the Bureau of Land Management, if the Bureau of Land Management had enough money Nationwide, they should have 10,000 people, okay? When the Biden administration took office, BLM had a 25% vacancy rate. That means that there were probably somewhere between 7 and 7,500 people that worked for BLM nationwide. Certainly, that didn't happen because of the move of the Washington office in terms of employees at Washington office going to other organizations. I think what happened was some people thought twice about wanting to come to work for BLM because they felt like there was this uncertainty about, you know, where our office is going to be, what's going to happen, what's the situation. I can tell you that a vacancy rate that high is not sustainable, and it some progress was made in filling some of those positions, but BLM is still very much understaffed, I believe, and they will be even more understaffed because many people are choosing to retire and to take the early deferment. Um, and I think the most important thing for the administration to understand is to unleash American energy, you need the Bureau of Land Management. And if you don't have a well trained, highly efficient, sufficiently staffed BLM, it's going to be pretty darn tough to do that.
I'll do two more questions here and then we'll move into the audience questions. Yes, please go ahead.
Can I interject something here? Oh, let me give you an example of some of the problems Congress has imposed upon us. Congress passed the National Environmental Policy Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act requires, crazily enough, that when the federal government undertakes a major federal action that significantly affects the quality of the human environment, the agency has to take a quote hard look unquote at the consequences. And over the years, both sides, people on both sides of these land use battles, have filed lawsuits, and it's begun a litigation thing. And we have NEPA documents, EISs, tied up in court for 10 or 20 years. And so what federal employees try to do is, well, is there a way to make our document litigation proof? If we just had enough detail in it, if we just wrote another 100 pages on it, if we just had another scientific report on it, maybe the lawyers wouldn't sue us and the judges wouldn't rule against us and stop our project. And that is a terrible, impossible burden that's being imposed on federal employees. You just pull your hair out. You say, I just can't get it right because the judge is going to throw this out. And the judge always does if he doesn't like the project. And so we need some help. We need some help from Congress to write some better laws and more specific laws to say, here's what we mean by this that doesn't change from administration to administration. That's why I'm pleased, for example, the Supreme Court got rid of the Chevron rule, because now Congress is going to be required, write what you mean what you say.
I think that's an interesting point about Chevron.
Mr. Pendley is 100% right about that.
Amazing. We found an area of agreement. We love that. And you actually addressed one of my questions about administrative changeover. So I will move to my last question before we get to the audience questions, which we have quite a few already. So that's wonderful. I'm counting more than 24 here. Yeah, it's incredible. So this one's for Perry, and then we will allow Mary Jo to respond. This is from an op-ed that ran in the Washington Examiner by Jonathan and Paige Brunitsky, who's both served in the first Trump administration. And they raised the concern that exporting the people could just export the culture, meaning that trying to make the federal government more efficient by moving it to places around the country would just bring along the potential for corruption and crony capitalism that currently plagues DC and could lead to the ruin of places that are currently free of those shackles. What's your response to that?
Oh, I got to tell you, I was so impressed with the people who applied for these jobs in Grand Junction. And we had to cap the applications at 50 because we had so many applications. So we're talking about very senior positions at the Bureau of Land Management here in Grand Junction. Top decision makers on recreation, on oil and gas, on mining, on archaeological issues, you name it. And every one of them, I asked, if I had posted this job in Washington, would you apply for it? Every one of them said, absolutely not. I want to live in Colorado. I want to work in Grand Junction, and I want to be able to recreate on the federal lands that surround it. They wanted to be out here, and they are all top notch. Uh, we didn't have any problem picking the best people possible for these jobs, and many of them were retained by the Biden administration. So I don't have that fear at all. I think we'll be able to hire, or President Trump will be able to hire the best possible people to staff these jobs and get the job done and fulfill what the statute demands of them.
And Mary Jo, it seems that you all have agreed that there do need to be some cuts made in federal government, and
Oh,
there's certainly places
absolutely.
to make things more efficient.
Absolutely.
Do you share the concerns of that op-ed that potentially moving things out of DC could sort of infect, so to speak, other
Infect other
parts of
places.
America?
I think I think one of the key points here is that if you if you make the choice to be a federal employee for your entire career, you know that the administration is going to change every 4 to 8 years. You know that you're going to have to follow the direction you're given, even if it maybe is not consistent with what you would do if you were the king of the world. But you make the conscious decision that you want to serve the public enough that you're willing to take the administration's guidance and do what you're supposed to do. When you do that, there isn't an infection. And the reality is, if you have an employee that's not willing to do that, you either need to help them find another job or need to convince them that, maybe they're not in the right line of work.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you got to do what the administration wants you to do.
And to follow up on that, to Perry, I think one of the concerns that a lot of Americans have about federal bureaucrats is they feel that they stymie the administration from within and act against maybe the political whims of whoever is the president at the time. Was that something that you experienced in your time serving in the federal government?
I've always had good experience in dealing with the federal workers. I was particularly pleased with the people I met out west. I'll tell you one of the myths. You ask questions in Washington D.C. You ask enough people, and it rolls downhill until finally somebody in Washington D.C. picks up the phone and calls the duty expert out in Williston, Montana, Williston, North Dakota, for example. So I've always had that confidence. Secretary Bernhardt, in his book, You Report to Me, had a very interesting story about one employee he met with in the Fish and Wildlife Service. And he said, "What do you do?" And she said, "Well, I speak for the mice." And uh, Bernhardt was horrified because he's a lawyer and a former solicitor that, hey, your job isn't speaking for the mice. Your job is to implement the Endangered Species Act as it relates to whether or not this particular critter is endangered or threatened or belongs on the list. So you run into that. I didn't run into it often. I thought I got great support, and I know Secretary Bernhardt did too.
And so we're going to go ahead and move into audience questions. So please keep submitting those. A lot of them are really great so far. I'm going to combine a couple into one question for Perry, and then Mary Jo, I'll allow you to respond. A lot of them are about Doge and government efficiency, as you can probably suspect based on audience reaction. And people want to know: is it efficient to, for example, pay workers through a deferred resignation program to not work for a period of months, or to pay the relocation costs of moving massive amounts of government employees out of Washington, D.C.?
Well, that's really a two-part question, and it's really above my pay grade to say whether or not it makes sense to pay somebody to not work for 6 months and then retire. Uh, but with regard to paying people to relocate or paying people to retire, we cross that bridge when we move the BLM headquarters out here to Colorado. And the accountants told us that it made economic sense. It paid for itself. If we had all of the top people out here in Grand Junction, then there wouldn't be the travel back and forth to DC because they'd be here in the field where 99% of the land is and 97% of the employees are. So I think at the end of the day, those decisions make sense. And the U.S. Forest Service is in the process as part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture and doing that right now.
So you mentioned there wouldn't be as much travel between Grand Junction and DC. Um, they would still have to go to DC, obviously, for certain
Yeah, but
functions. Are you saying it would just be less frequent?
yeah, my point was there wouldn't be as much travel from DC out to the field because the decision makers would already be in the field. And you know, you wouldn't have to have somebody fly from Washington D.C. to Montana or Washington D.C. to Arizona. They'd already be out here and they can make those trips.
Okay. And Mary Jo, to ask a question a slightly different way to you, outside of relocating government agencies, what do you view as some specific ways to increase efficiency in the federal bureaucracy?
Well, again, as I mentioned, I don't think that, and I'm not advocating here for massive headquarters offices in DC. I think that having some functional areas, like having the Wild Horse and Burro program located in Nevada, makes a lot of sense because the Wild Horse and Burro program in Nevada is massive. That's where the biggest issues are. Not that not that that's where the only issues are, but that's where the biggest issues are. Those sorts of things do make sense. Um, but I think that if you scatter all functional programs, you lose the connectivity of interdisciplinary work being able to be done in an efficient and effective manner. A lot of good work happens in the hallway, frankly. And you know, I absolutely I know that the pandemic necessitated people working from home and people having to meet on Microsoft Teams or Zoom. It was a good thing I was retired because I would have absolutely hated that. I have to see people face to face. I need to talk to them. We need to sit down and figure things out together. And doing it on a computer screen is horrible, I think. But anyway, I think there are ways you could organize the federal government agencies that would be more efficient than they are now. But I think the important thing is you have to think about it before you do it. I don't believe that acting before the process of really figuring it out is a good idea.
And one of the questions is for you. They want to know, in regards to your point about understaffing, if potentially moving the BLM headquarters back to Grand Junction or somewhere else in the West could help solve that problem by giving more job opportunities to people who live close to the land and really love the land.
Actually, BLM has so many offices in the West that there are, at least before the administration came in this time, there were opportunities everywhere for people to get great jobs in the West. I don't disagree with Mr. Pendley that I'm sure people told him that they would have preferred to work in Grand Junction than inside the Beltway. Um, but the reality is that there is some value spending some time in Washington D.C. because you do learn how things work there, and you have the opportunity to impact the organization in a positive way by working with all the entities that are located there. Now, if all organizations end up being sent out to other locations, that probably won't be the situation anymore.
Barry, did you want to respond to that?
Right. I don't know how big an office she's speaking about in Washington, D.C., but we left 61 people there to handle congressional affairs and public affairs and budget issues and FOIAs and so forth. Uh, so uh, I think that was big enough to deal with the Washington issues. I, Look, I've been in and out of Washington for decades, and I don't know if I ever learned anything back there, wandering up and down the halls. And speaking about the pandemic, I mean, that was a terrible tragedy that happened. The government imposed upon us. Government employees were on maximum telework for nearly 5 years. When I went back to Washington in 2020 and early 21, uh, the BLM hallway was a ghost town. There was nobody there. Everybody's on maximum telework. You simply can't run a government like that. I think she's absolutely right. You need to meet people. You need to be working with people. You just can't be on Zoom every day. You have personal ad hoc interactions, and we were deprived of that. And it's really a shame what the Biden administration did to leave that in place for so long.
And I work in downtown DC every day, and I can tell you the traffic has certainly returned. Perry, this one's for you. In regards to trusting experts in the field and having that on the ground experience, one of the audience members wants to know if you do trust those people who are on the ground, then why do you have to be there specifically? Why can't they just relay their observations to you in DC?
Well, at the end of the day, me as a director or acting director or deputy director, um, at the end of the day, it's on me. And so when I say to Secretary Bernhardt, this is what I decided to do, that's on me. And I want to be confident in that decision. Like Reagan said, trust but verify. And being in the field with that expert, okay, I get it. I see what you're saying. I'm not just, I got your piece of paper, I got your 10-page document, I got your decision document, I see what you're recommending I do. I want to be out in the field. I want to hear you tell me. I want to see it and then say, I get it. I get it. I agree with you.
And a
And
quick
I can defend this decision to the Secretary of Interior.
And a quick follow up to that, has there ever been a time in your on the ground experience where what you thought you wanted actually got changed by what you saw there? Was there ever a time where your decision making process was altered by your on the ground experience?
Yes, but I can't talk about it.
Ew.
It's in litigation. But it was something where everybody agreed, and I was the odd man out, and everybody was like, let's shut down this Zoom meeting because Penley's off off chart here. What's going on? And it was simply because I'd been to that place, and I say, you know what? I think the decision is the wrong one. Yeah, I think it makes all the difference in the world.
I wish we could just go off the record for a moment, but unfortunately the cameras are rolling. Mary Jo, did you want to respond to that question?
Mr. Pendley is absolutely correct about the length of time that people were out of the office after the pandemic. I did not agree with it either because I think that I think you lose so much of the interdisciplinary value and so much interaction. Just it unless you're face to face again, which is why I think leadership needs to be in DC. Um, you really need the interaction for things to be effective and to do it remotely. I know that there are probably many people in this country that still work remotely, but I'm just not a fan. Yeah.
And I'll go back to you. There are a couple of audience members who asked this question. They wanted to know about your opinion of the Trump study on the relocation of federal agencies not being sufficient. They wanted you to maybe identify some of the areas in which you thought the study was flawed or maybe didn't have enough detail.
Well, I just think it wasn't. I don't think it was very. I felt like it was a study to prove the decision that was already made. In other words, it was the study to validate what they had already decided they wanted to do. I don't think it was. I don't think it was very detailed. I don't think it was very. I don't think the financial evaluation was. It just wasn't rigorous enough, right? It just seemed like it was something that was cobbled together to try to justify the move that the administration wanted to make.
Okay. And then, Perry, one for you. People in the audience seem to be concerned about energy development on public lands, and they want to know why they should trust either your assertion or the Trump administration's assertion that they value public lands if they want to open some of that up to energy development.
Well, the unique thing about BLM lands, unlike almost every other federal land, the National Park Service is a single use. It's to be maintained as it is in perpetuity for a pleasuring ground for the American people, uh, down through the generations. BLM land is a different kettle of fish. BLM land is multiple use land. Yes, there are some wilderness areas that are set aside where man is a visitor who does not remain. There are national monuments on that the BLM manages. There are wild and scenic river areas that the BLM manages, but most of the land that the BLM manages are what we call multiple use and sustained yield lands. And those lands are supposed to be used for grazing, for mining, for oil and gas, for archaeological resources, for recreation, you name it, all sorts of activities. In addition, beginning in 1920, Congress in the Mineral Leasing Act of 1920 said the BLM will every single month hold a lease sale on land open to oil and gas leasing within that state to allow the American people to find and discover and develop uh, rare energy resources on the lands. And so when Obama came in, he shut that down. President Trump restarted it. We had the biggest BLM oil and gas sale in the history of the BLM in New Mexico in 2018. And it pushed us over the top. In 2019, we became energy independent. Biden comes in, and for the first time in history, he shuts the whole program down. Federal judge says, no, you can't shut that program down. He says, I don't care. I'm going to shut the program down there. Biden had fewer acres leased than any president. You have to go all the way back to Harry Truman. And Harry Truman didn't have the Outer Continental Shelf program. So by Congress has said these lands are for all sorts of activities, including oil and gas. And that's why, we came through that environmental period where we passed the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act and the safe, all sorts of these statutes and NEPA to make sure that the decisions we make and the things we do on land, I mean, you were implementing these statutes for 3 decades to make sure the oil and gas people who were operating on the public lands, the federal lands, were doing it right. And if they weren't doing it right, we shut them down. And so there you go. And so I think people should have confidence. First of all, Congress is saying this. This is what you do with these lands. Secondly, Congress has given us laws to make sure it's done safely and well. And thirdly, that's our sworn obligation as federal office holders to implement those laws. So I think people should have confidence that it's going to be done safely and efficiently.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I mean, the organization that I'm president of, the Public Lands Foundation, one of our primary tenets is our belief in the multiple use and sustained yield mission that FLIPMA gave us. And I can tell you, as someone that worked for 36 years for BLM as an assistant field manager, a field manager, a district manager, an associate state director, and a state director, we always made sure that people were doing things the right way, even when sometimes we had to shut them down, which is never a good thing to have to do, because the minute that happens, they're going to be calling somebody above you. But at the end of the day, if they were not following the stipulations, if they were not following the conditions of approval on the application for permit to drill, we would shut them down. That is why the BLM needs the whole suite of disciplines that it has, because in order to do the job right, you need wildlife biologists, you need archaeologists, you need petroleum engineering technicians, you need petroleum engineers, you need just a wide variety of people if you're going to manage lands for multiple use and do it the right way.
Oh, one question from me, moderator's prerogative, sorry. But as constituents see both elected officials and federal bureaucrats perhaps not acting in their best interest, or maybe they elect a member of Congress and they feel they get to DC and they don't uphold the promises that they made on the campaign trail, what are ways other than potentially moving some of those offices closer to the people? And I mean this broader outside of BLM, but across the federal bureaucracy, to make sure that constituents do feel like their concerns are being heard by the federal government.
I'll take that first. Well,
I'll
They're
tell you
stumped.
this, and this comes from my experience, not as a federal employee, but 30 years litigating on behalf of a nonprofit public interest law firm. litigating on behalf of people who could not afford to hire an attorney and fighting against the federal government. And oftentimes I thought the federal agencies were engaged in abusive activity. It was doing things that were wrong, not consistent with statute, which is why I filed a lawsuit. And I got pushback from the Department of Justice. My view is that Department of Justice doesn't care about doing justice. It cares about winning lawsuits. Uh, that's on them. And when I would go to Washington and take that complaint to my clients, a congressman or senator, once they found out the case was in litigation, they, hey, hey, wait a second, Perry, you telling me this is in litigation? Yes, sir, I'm representing your constituent in this case. Oh, I can't get involved in that. But you're writing them checks. You're writing checks to this agency that's doing this bad thing. You're writing checks to this Department of Justice that's litigating improperly and, in my view, unethically. And so, unfortunately, in many situations, there's no adult supervision about the things that are going on. Everybody's afraid to call somebody on their misbehavior, and it results in terrible situations for people who are affected by federal agency decisions. Somebody comes onto your farm and says, your North 40 is a wetland. Who says? I say, and you can't use it. Well, what can I do about it? Nothing. You can hire a lawyer, see how far that goes. That's a terrible spot for people to be in. And too many American people are.
Mary Jo.
Well, I can tell you with, I think if you asked anybody that worked for me, we made sure we were doing the right thing. Not to say we wouldn't make mistakes periodically, but if employees were not doing what they should do, we held them accountable. There's a myth that you cannot terminate a federal employee. That is absolutely untrue. It's a hell of a job to do it, but a supervisor that is responsible and trying to do the right thing can terminate an employee if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, or if they're overreaching, or if they are acting inappropriately. I think it's critical that employees be held accountable, and sometimes that does not happen.
Do you think it should be easier to fire federal employees?
Depends on when you what day you asked me and who you were asking me about. But at the end of the day, I believe that federal employees deserve protections. I do not believe that it should be so difficult that you cannot terminate bad actors, I guess I would say.
Okay, and then we will go to unless you wanted to respond, Perry, we'll go to the last audience question before closing remarks. And I think this is a great one to end on. It's from a CMU energy management student. And they ask, the BLM and the federal government ultimately serve the same nation and the same people. Ideally, they should be aligned in mission and strategy. So my question to both sides is, what would a truly effective collaborative relationship between the BLM and federal leadership look like? One that best supports energy development, land stewardship, and public trust. Whoever wants to go first.
Well, it's too bad we're not hiring. I think that
It's a very thoughtful question.
Very thoughtful question. The federal government it's complex, and I do believe that for the most part, BLM employees do a good job. I had terrific people that worked for me. I worked alongside terrific people. There are very few people I can think of in my career that I wouldn't want to work for or with again, because they were absolutely amazing. And I think that when you are following the regulations and following the guidance that you're getting from the administration and doing the right thing by the lands and by the people that use them, I think that collaboration, there's no substitute for that collaboration. And I think when that collaboration happens, things turn out the way they're supposed to, and it works for everyone. It's not an easy process. That's one of the challenges about speeding up NEPA reviews. And I agree with Mr. Pendley that NEPA has become a gargantuan thing that needs some sort of guardrails. But if you work well with stakeholders and with cooperators and with the people that use the lands, you make the best decisions. And those decisions work for everybody. It's not an easy process and it takes a while. It can be extremely time consuming. And that's one of the challenges about trying to get NEPA done quickly is if you're working with cooperators, it extends the amount of time you need to come up with a good decision.
Barry?
Well, that's one of the great challenges running the Bureau of Land Management because it is a multiple use agency. And because you do have to serve all of these different federal statutes that Congress has written. But at the same time, you need to serve the American people. And I think they were terribly disturbed during the Biden administration when he shut down oil and gas leasing on federal lands. And in fact, shut down all multiple use. You look up, I mentioned in my opening, Sweetwater County, Wyoming. That resource management plan drew the stings and arrows of everybody in Wyoming because it shut down true multiple use. It declared the whole resource management area to be a conservation zone, meaning essentially a preservation area, and not open for off-road vehicle activity, not open for oil and gas, not open for mining. And yeah, is it difficult? Is it difficult to achieve that balance? Yes, it is, but that's what Congress told us to do. And sometimes the highest and best use of these lands is to get the energy resources because they are so rare. They are so unique. And because we're operating in a world market where we have to compete with oil and gas resources from foreign countries and mining activity in China. So it can be done. I think President Trump did it. I think he's doing it again. I think President Biden failed, and we saw the tragic results, and the people voted the way they did.
Now, as a reminder to the audience, we are going to move to closing statements. The post-debate poll will open up during this time period. So please make sure that you vote so we can see if any opinions have changed. And Mr. William Perry Pendley, you will be first with 5 minutes for closing remarks. You don't get to see until after you speak. Sorry.
Thank you. In 1868, the Union Pacific Railroad cleared Summit Hill west of Cheyenne at 8,247 feet and entered Laramie, Wyoming, facing a decision. Where should the railroad go? Should it go west along the trail that was already there? Or should it go slightly north and western direction? At the end of the day, because of the proximity of the mountains on that southern route, because of the high winds, because of the snows, the Union Pacific put its rail line along the northern route. And there built the towns of Rock River and Medicine Bow and Hanna. In 1913, federal and Wyoming officials were trying to decide where to put in the first transcontinental route, the Lincoln Highway, what later became US 30. They chose to follow the railroad. After all, the right-of-way was there, the snow fences were there, and those towns that serviced the railroad were there as well. In 1955, federal and Wyoming officials again were faced with the same decision. Do we follow the railroad? Do we follow US 30? Do we follow Lincoln Highway? Or do we go another way? And the people of Wyoming had evidence. They had evidence of how dangerous that southern route was. After all, the snowfall in 1948 around Elk Mountain was 20 inches. North up in Medicine Bow is only 8. So the people of Wyoming, it's an easy decision once again, but federal officials, the Bureau of Public Roads decided, no, we want the road. We want a shorter road. We want to save 20 miles by putting this road from Laramie to Welcott Junction. And people in Wyoming were horrified. So horrified that the senator from Wyoming held a hearing and he invited the Bureau of Public Roads in front of him there in Washington, D.C., and he harangued them, demanded they change their minds. And they said, Senator, with all due respect, we're highway engineers. They didn't quite say we represent science, but just might as well have. Anyway, if you have any snow problems, modern snow equipment can deal with the situation. Back in Wyoming, we thought the Bureau of Public Roads had lost its mind. Nevertheless, frankly, we didn't think the road would ever be open. But it did open on October the 3rd of 1970. They opened the new highway. 400 people showed up. Everybody who was anybody was there. 4 days later, the road was closed. Blowing and drifting snow shut down the road. There were 126 accidents over the next 3 months. There were 6 days of closure. And that foreshadowed the decades of closures and death and destruction that would happen along that stretch of highway, because after all, they had built their highway smack dab in the middle of a wind tunnel. It wasn't just a wind tunnel, it was a high altitude wind tunnel that began at 7,400 feet, peaked out at 7,900 feet, almost as high as Sherman Hill, the highest point of I-80, east of Laramie. And despite the expenditure of hundreds of millions of dollars of the people of Wyoming on road design and snow fences and high-tech equipment, they couldn't prevent the closures. They couldn't prevent the closures. Charles Carrault and On the Road called it the worst stretch of interstate in the world. The truckers who drive the route, it was the Vietnam War, remember, called it the Snow Chi Minh Trail. It was terrible. And conditions on that stretch of roads changed milepost by milepost, minute by minute. Even on a beautiful, clear, sunny day like we had today in Grand Junction, I-80 could be closed. And it resulted in tragedy, time and time again. Back in 2006, in the springtime, a family from near where I live, in Conifer, Colorado, was in Utah coming home in separate cars. Dad got home, Mom didn't. Mom, with some of her kids, drove into a wall of snow, into 22-car crash. 6 people died, dozens were injured seriously. That's what happens, although extreme and exceptional. That's what happens when people far, far away make decisions without considering the expertise, the expressions, and the experience of the people who live here. And I say, we shouldn't let it happen again. Again, I vote affirmative.
And the 5 minutes to Miss Mary Jo Rugwell.
Let me see if I can do this. Is that okay? All right. So my role today was to debate the negative position that federal agencies should be moved outside of Washington, D.C. In addition to working for the Bureau of Land Management for over 36 years, I have over 46 years of experience as a federal civil servant. I retired as a senior executive and was privileged to supervise an amazing cadre of employees. The tendency to make ill-advised organizational changes is damaging to not only the employees, but to those they serve. The process of reorganizing is sometimes used to create the illusion of progress, when in fact it produces confusion, inefficiency, and demoralization. Reorganization should be done for the right reason, which is to make organizations more efficient. This begs the question, is that really the administration's goal? The Bureau of Land Management has never really recovered from the organizational changes that were made under the first Trump administration. While some progress was made in the last couple of years to replace the institutional knowledge that was lost in 2019, the BLM has struggled to fill those voids. Initiating yet another move will be expensive and cause further damage. Prior to the administration change, BLM's intent was to keep the Grand Junction location as a Western headquarters staffed by the Directorate in charge of National Conservation Lands and Community Partnerships. That would maintain a significant presence in Grand Junction. As stated previously, the Bureau of Land Management is already a decentralized organization. Approximately 97% of BLM employees live and work in the West, where the BLM administered public lands are located, as illustrated by the map that's being shown on the screen right now, which was recently published by the New York Times. If allowed, they can make resource-based and collaborative land management decisions that are consistent with the direction they receive from the administration. If the existing delegations of authority are honored at the national level, the decision makers are already in the West. While on-the-ground decisions must be consistent with the administration's guidance, they also must be consistent with the needs of the resources and those who depend upon them. This will result in sustainable and durable decisions that stand the test of time. Prior to initiating any move of BLM's headquarters again, a thorough analysis of both the benefits and costs should be undertaken. This really didn't happen during the first Trump administration. Moving federal agencies to different locations in the country will make it impossible for constituents and stakeholders to efficiently visit with the leadership of multiple organizations in person. I know that the current administration values the importance of in-person connections since they've required all federal employees to return to the office. I am not advocating for federal agencies to maintain massive headquarters organizations in Washington, D.C. However, there are a lot of important tasks that must be done by staff in that location. To arrive at the types of positions and numbers of employees needed inside the Beltway, a thoughtful and detailed analysis of the needs of each organization is required. Lacking a headquarters presence in Washington, D.C. would put agencies at a significant disadvantage. They would lack timely input into daily discussions on policy, budget, legislation, and problem solving. It will create chaos and result in a lack of consistency. This would be a disservice to all Americans who rely on the federal government to provide crucial resources and services. Scattering those required to perform the critical policy functions of a federal organization across the country is just not an effective way to manage an organization. I want to thank the Steamboat Institute and their staff for the invitation and for the excellent job they've done in organizing the debate. Thank you also to Mr. Pendley and to Amber for their participation and great job today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here at Colorado Mesa University. Thank you.
A wonderful job to both of our debaters. And I think now we will pull up the post-debate poll results. Well, okay, interesting. So we went from 49% agree to 51% agree, but it looks like you persuaded most of the undecided category. Right. So previously there were 33% of the 33% of the audience that disagreed. That now sits at 45% with just 4% undecided. So it's pretty close to a toss-up. So well done to both of you. One more final round of applause for our debaters. Really, really excellent job.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Both were very well prepared, and it takes courage to get on a debate stage. And how about our moderator, Amber Duke? Didn't she do a great job? Just very briefly, I want to thank once again the CMU Civic Forum for giving us the opportunity to come back to Colorado Mesa University. I would also like to extend a special thanks to the Adolph Coors Foundation, Bruce and Marcy Benson, and all of our foundation supporters that you saw on the screen tonight for supporting Steamboat Institute's Campus Liberty Tour. If you enjoyed tonight's debate and you would like to see more debates on college campuses and back here in Grand Junction, we ask that you consider supporting our organization. We are a nonprofit organization that does accept tax-deductible contributions. So go to steamboatinstitute.org if you'd like to support our work. Remember, tonight's debate will be available on our YouTube channel, usually within 24 to 48 hours in its entirety. So you can watch it, share it with others. We hope you will do that. If you watched online, thank you for watching online. Those of you who are here with us tonight, please stick around. I believe we've got some food and beverage and you can visit with our speakers. Thank you again for sharing part of your evening with us for this important discussion.